Good evening, and welcome to Nightmare Theater, episode 21. Tonight we're back to a presentation, but I think it's a pretty interesting topic, near-death experiences. It's something that came up towards the end, I think, of 2 weeks ago's presentation. But before we get into the presentation, I had a number of nightmares this week. For those of you who don't know, I'm in the last year of my PhD, and things kind of broke down a bit at one point in the lab. And I'm kind of like pinched for time now, so basically I'm under a lot of stress, so in that circumstance you're bound to have many nightmares. One of them in particular I thought could have been a horror movie, like it was quite something. And I'd like to read that first. I guess if I were to give it a title, I'd call it The Drooping Faced Man. Let's put the music on for this. So I had this on Wednesday night. It was my little brother and I, and he believed that there was something paranormal going on in the house we were in. He kept leaving creepy stuff around everywhere, images of the drooping-faced man, who looks similar to the mask from Scream, with big dark eyes and a face that looks kind of half-melted or crooked, except the drooping-faced man sort of had the opposite face width, so the chin was larger, and then it kind of was a bit of a teardrop shaped face. Right, so yeah, it was like a heavier set face too, and he had a distorted mouth that hung open. Anyway, my little brother was putting these images of the drooping-faced man all over the house, taping them to the ceiling, setting up cameras that turn on when we leave the house or are triggered by motion sensors, and he also tucked pants into boots and basically made a makeshift mannequin onto which he sewed a picture of the drooping-faced man's face. He had paranormal stuff. Sorry, this wasn't him. Paranormal stuff started happening every night. Like the lights would flicker while I was cooking pasta, or I felt something slimy on my hands when I was just sitting there watching something and looking down to see nothing on my hands. And then it looked like a horror movie, and things would escalate over time as my brother progressively became more and more obsessed with the drooping-faced man. He was convinced that this was the spirit that was haunting the house. Although I had experienced paranormal things happening, I had not seen anything of the drooping-faced man, so I found it freaky that my little brother was obsessing about it so much, and he had such a strong idea of this concept in his mind. He puts together all these videos of different drooping-faced man paraphernalia around the house at night, with weird lighting and creepy music, and I watch them and they make me feel uneasy. This took place in the kitchen, garage, and living room and dining room of this big modern house that I'd never actually seen before. At the climax of the dream, my brother was wearing a red drooping-faced man mask for kids, and I was like, hey, I don't think this is a good idea. I don't like what you're doing here. It was the middle of the night. And he was like, oh no, it's okay. If weird things start happening, just take the mask off me and it'll stop. And I was like, okay. And as soon as he put on the mask, I could tell that it already had him. It was hard to see in the darkness, and his limbs actually appeared to be becoming smaller, as does his face. Like his body was literally reverting to being a child. He's joking at me, like he's trying to bite my finger, but he isn't saying anything anymore, and the way he's moving and grabbing at me is so unnatural that it's scaring me. And I took his mask off, and he had literally, in his face, reverted to being a 10 to 13-year-old kid, both in the size and the look of his face. His eyes were open, but he was very clearly in a trance. His eyes were glazed over, and he was staring into space. They were perfect semicircles, so as in the top of the eye was completely flat, and then just a perfect bottom circle of the pupil, iris, eye white under that. Just perfect semicircles, every part of the eye. And that really freaked me out. So The bottom half of all of the parts of the eye were also sort of drooping, and I took out my phone camera to try to get a video of his face so that if he broke out of his possession and returned to normal, I'd be able to show it to him in the morning to convince him not to do this again. I was holding him by the neck in my left hand while trying to get my phone out, and he had this creepy, droopy mouth with the mask off that resembled the drooping face man. So like the lips were just hanging open sort of grotesquely. And as I was holding him by the neck, he was trying to reach my hand with his chin. He wasn't using his arms at first, sort of like the way a baby would reach for something, just like mouth first, and he was trying to bite my fingers. Like a little kid, yeah. And then he finally figured out to use his hands, and he bit off my left index finger. And at that point in the dream, I was semi-lucid. I realized that it was a nightmare, and I was so afraid that I was like, let's just pull out of this. So yeah, I woke up at 2:47 a.m. and my heart was pounding. I also had a second nightmare on Wednesday night. Went back to bed at like 3 in the morning or whatever, and I had another nightmare where I was just in my apartment here, but everything was like stripped from it, like the carpet was gone, and like everything was just nasty and gross, and there was this food, all these like meal preps that I had made, and I had left them out, I didn't realize, and there was just cockroaches and mice and vermin like all over the place, and it was just a really disturbing nightmare, but not quite as intense as the drooping faced man. But without further ado, let's get into this presentation. That's all for the nightmares that I had this week. I reached out to a couple people, by the way, for more what are they called? Interviews in the coming weeks, but we'll see what we hear. Okay, looks like you can see. So tonight we're talking about near-death experiences. What is a near-death experience? Well, at times of extreme danger or trauma, or of course in situations where someone is severely injured and almost dead, many people report having out-of-body experiences, such as seeing intense light, or a feeling of peace, intense dream-like hallucinations, as it were. People who have dream reality confusion are more likely to experience near-death experiences. So that was one of the things we talked about, I think, 2 episodes ago. And there's actually some numbers on this. So of those who reported having near-death experiences, 60% also reported having at least one incident where they felt that sleep and wakefulness blurred together, whereas in the general population, those without a near-death experience, only about 24% had had an experience where they had dream reality confusion. So just a bit of an interesting statistic there. Some studies have shown that electrical stimulation to the brain can trigger aspects of near-death experiences. Drugs can do the same. Ketamine, a horse tranquilizer and a legal recreational drug, can cause many of the same symptoms as a near-death experience, but spontaneous near-death experiences remain unexplained. It's said that about 1 in 10 people who have a cardiac arrest in a hospital setting will have a near-death experience, so that's actually quite a few. Thousands of survivors of these harrowing touch-and-go situations tell of leaving their damaged bodies behind and encountering a realm beyond everyday existence, unconstrained by the usual boundaries of space and time. These powerful mystical experiences can lead to permanent transformation of their lives. Many people have personality changes as a result. Or some describe some sort of life-changing event. So a near-death experience can be an extremely positive or an extremely negative event. The former receive all the press and relate to the feeling of an overwhelming presence, something numinous or divine. A jarring disconnect separates the massive trauma to the body and the peacefulness and feeling of oneness with the universe. But not all near-death experiences are blissful. Some can be frightening, marked by intense terror, anguish, loneliness, and despair. Any close brush with death reminds us of the precariousness and fragility of life, and can strip away the layers of psychological suppression that shield us from uncomfortable thoughts of existential oblivion. For most, these events fade in intensity with time, and normality eventually reasserts itself, although they may leave post-traumatic stress disorder in their wake. But near-death experiences are recalled with unusual intensity and lucidity over decades. A 2017 study found that people who had near-death experiences described them as being realer than real. That's another thing that we've talked about, dreams that feel more real than real life. Priscilla McGill, who was struck by a vehicle in March 2017, described a near-death experience she had as, "At first, I just remember like sitting on a cloud in the light and peace and calm. No fear, none." So this experience, she says, changed her life forever. And this would be a heavenly experience. Yet a man who was stabbed in a fight said of his near-death experience, "I knew my body was still on the gurney, but I was floating, and I began to hear screams of people all around me, crying and wailing." He later went on to become a preacher, thinking he had seen a preview of hell. Although the exact cause of near-death experiences is unknown, there are theories as to what's happening to the brain during a near-death experience. Modern death requires irreversible loss of brain function. When the brain is starved of blood flow and oxygen, the patient faints in a fraction of a minute, and his or her electroencephalogram becomes isoelectric, in other words, flat. This implies that large-scale, spatially distributed electrical activity within the cortex has broken down. Like a town that loses power one neighborhood at a time, local regions of the brain go offline one after the other. The mind, whose substrate is whichever neurons remain capable of generating electrical activity, does what it always does. It tells a story shaped by the person's experience, memory, and cultural expectations. Given these power outages, this experience may produce rather strange and idiosyncratic stories that make up the corpus of NDE reports, near-death experience reports. So the person undergoing it, the near-death experience, is as real as anything the mind produces during normal waking life. When the entire brain has shut down because of complete power loss, the mind is extinguished, along with the consciousness. If and when oxygen and blood flow are restored, the brain boots up and the narrative flow of experience resumes. So there are a few historical figures, of course, who've reported near-death experiences. This is not by any means a new phenomenon. And for some reason, whenever I encounter something that's an example of something we're talking about, but it's from hundreds of years ago, that makes it feel a little bit more special to me. So this is an account of a near-death experience by an admiral, British admiral, Sir Francis Beaufort. These are his words. "A calm feeling of the most perfect tranquility succeeded the most tumultuous sensation. Nor was I in any bodily pain. On the contrary, my sensations were now of rather a pleasurable cast, though the senses were thus deadened. Not so the mind. Its activity seemed to be invigorated in a ratio which defies all description. For thought rose after thought with a rapidity of succession that is not only indescribable, but probably inconceivable by anyone who has been himself in a similar situation. The course of these thoughts I can even now, in a great measure, retrace. The event had just taken place. Thus, traveling backwards, every incident of my past life seemed to me to glance across my recollection in retrograde procession. The whole period of my existence seemed to be placed before me in a kind of panoramic view." So his life flashed before his eyes. Very well put. Here's another knighted individual, Sir Alexander Ogston, who is actually the man who discovered Staphylococcus. Once he had a near-death experience after he succumbed to a bout of typhoid fever, and he described it thusly. I lay, as it seemed, in a constant stupor, which excluded the existence of any hopes or fears. Mind and body seemed to be dual, and to some extent separate. I was conscious of the body, as an inert tumbled mass near a door. It belonged to me, but it was not I. I was conscious that my mental self used regularly to leave the body. I was then drawn rapidly back to it, joined it with disgust, and it became I, and was fed, spoken to, and cared for. And though I knew that death was hovering about, having no thought of religion nor dread of the end, and roamed on beneath the murky skies apathetic and contented until something again disturbed the body where it lay, when I was drawn back to it afresh. So of course this is a description of an out-of-body experience. By the way, it seems like everybody from hundreds of years ago was just also a really good writer. Like, in addition to like whatever else they did. It's kind of interesting. Susan Blackmore. So this is not such an old example, and I couldn't find a picture of her, which is why I just put it in the mail thing. But this is a British writer from the near past, and she had an emergency gastrectomy in 1991, and then said of her near-death experience, "On the 4th day following that operation, I went into shock and became unconscious for several hours. Although thought to be unconscious, I remembered for years afterwards the entire detailed conversation that passed between the surgeon and anesthetist present. I was laying above my own body, totally free of pain, and looking down at my own self with compassion for the agony I could see on the face. I was floating peacefully. Then I was going elsewhere, floating towards a dark, but not frightening, curtain-like area. Then I felt total peace. Suddenly it all changed. I was slammed back into my body again, very much aware of the agony again." So that's actually about it for this week's presentation. Bit of a shorter one. It's kind of interesting to think about how this might relate to other sorts of hallucinations, maybe sleep paralysis, for example. Like there's so little that we know about all these things and just the way the brain works and how one hallucin might relate to another hallucination. Sorry, I don't know what I just said, but it wasn't the right word. Anyway, hope you enjoyed that. Everything will be okay. Thank you. My mother had an out-of-body experience upon the birth of her first child, who had died at birth. She was above the room, looking down, and was told the reason for the loss of the child. Upon waking, she knew he was gone without having been told, but she could not recall the reason. Wow. Yeah, that's freaky. It's hard to know, like, to what extent the mind is picking up on these cues, or, maybe like she did hear something even though unconscious, or maybe she could just feel it, right? Because everything is connected. Freaky though. I've not had anything quite like that myself. But now I'd like to read some nightmares from Reddit. From what I saw this week, they looked pretty good, but we'll see. This is a post by a user named the_duckbee_kaiju. The post is titled, "My Worst Nightmare Ever." Sorry if it's short or doesn't have enough story, I just thought I'd share it here. It looks good to me. The post reads, "My nightmare starts off waking up, like normal after getting a drink. I got on a call with my friend. We were chatting like normal. Then his voice starts corrupting and everything turns black. I woke up in my bed again, instantly hearing crackle sounds from my closet. I checked the house for people, but nobody was home. So I went to go call someone, but my phone was corrupted. YouTube wouldn't unpause. Safari wouldn't type. Messenger was replaced by an app that would shut off my phone if I clicked it, and calls was just gone in general. So I could do nothing but wait. I was waiting for Zoom to start so I could see people. Then I saw that it was 2 o'clock, but I didn't see any iPad, so I waited longer while the crackle sound was still going. Eventually my mom got home, so I left my room feeling lightheaded, and when I looked at my mom, she was normal. I tried to talk, but I couldn't, so I went to get my phone, but when I looked back at my mom, her face looked deformed, so I screamed and closed my door. That I never saw closed the door that I never saw her again in the nightmare, so I waited even longer, just for the day to end. Well, there was some audio of a video going on how to survive a death game in the background. But then Dad got home, so I ducked down. I didn't want to look at his face. All I saw was the reflection, and he came into my room just to stare at me 3 times. He left for good, the 3rd time, so to escape I broke the window and climbed out. When I got out, there was no one outside besides 3 people, 2 males and 1 female. We walked around a bit, then everything turned black again. The dream ended, with all 3 of their deformed and melted faces popped out of nowhere and scared me awake. I woke up sweating and saying, "Don't let them find me." I don't know if this was a lucid dream, but it sure felt like one. Thank you for reading and have a great day. I feel like you would know if it was a lucid dream. I'm not sure if you mean something else by that. Because if it was a lucid dream, that just means that you know that it was a dream at the time. So there's a couple of things that I can think of on the interpretation chart. One thing that's interesting is this idea of corruption in the dream. And at first it starts with the technology, like there's something just wrong about the way your technology is working. And then there's something wrong about the way your parents are behaving or your family is behaving. So I would actually say certainly the part with your family, I would call that an imposter nightmare. And I think I would actually also extend that imposter diagnosis to the technology as well. So an imposter nightmare is one in which there's something that you deal with every day. So usually a person, so like a family member that you're interacting with every day, but there's just something off about them and they're actually not themselves. And an imposter nightmare can indicate that you suspect that a person in real life is untrustworthy or not who they appear to be. It can also be a warning to protect yourself, your information, and your psychological space. Now, I don't usually take that second interpretation, but I think that that actually could be the interpretation that I would use to describe the technology. Maybe you feel like your information or your psychological space is being manipulated or accessed in an uncomfortable way by all of these things that won't run, like your Zoom won't run or whatever. Like maybe if you have classes, for example, maybe you're worried constantly, like, oh, maybe I forgot to turn my camera off, maybe I forgot to leave the call, that sort of thing. So like maybe it's just this feeling of paranoia, working from home or whatever, having a camera running, having just being in constant communication online, that you feel like you don't have privacy anymore because your home is your office. That could be one interpretation of that. As for your parents or your family, you suspect that the person in real life is untrustworthy or not who they appear to be. Take from that what you will, I don't really know. But the only other part of that dream that I can recall is there was a silent scream at one point. There was a part where you went to vocalize and you were unable to. So if you look up here on the dream chart, it's still towards the bottom, but it's up from imposter. A silent scream in a nightmare can indicate that you feel like you don't have a voice or you aren't being heard in real life, or you feel helpless or frustrated with some situation. Now, if I take the second interpretation there, I can more easily tie that into the idea of the imposter nightmare and the technology. So you just feel helpless, like you really don't want to be in these online classes or dealing with these, social media or whatever, but it feels like you don't have a choice because, Corona is happening or something like that. I feel like I would almost call this a quarantine nightmare. Maybe you feel, uneasy about your family just because you're having to spend so much time with them, for example. So I could be totally wrong, but that is how I would interpret that nightmare. This is a post by a user named Super Pupper Hero. The post is titled, "I died vividly 2 times in my dream." The post reads, "I was in a parking lot when a guy came sprinting at me with a knife and slit my throat. I remember not having any air and gurgling in my blood. The second time, same scenario, but I was with someone. I remember saying, 'I can't breathe,' while the other person just stood there, watching, not knowing what to do. If I remember, the killer got caught, but then I woke up." So that one's a bit of a shorter one. Being attacked, third from the bottom. You feel out of control or vulnerable in some aspect of your life. The weapon used and the identity of the attacker may be clues as to what you feel vulnerable about. The way that the man is described, it sounds like he's not someone that you know in real life, because I feel like you would have mentioned that. It sounds more like just a general feeling of being out of control or vulnerable. And then death in a dream generally, as you can see, 6th from the bottom, I believe. There are some big changes in your life that you feel that you're not in control. So that's actually exactly the same as feeling out of control in relation to being attacked. So I guess based on the dream chart, we can interpret that one pretty easily. Consistent between the two themes that we can analyze in the dream, you feel out of control in some aspect of your life. Now, what can you do about that? Well, you can't do anything about it until you figure out what that thing is, like what aspect of your life you feel out of control in. And from there, you can move on. But until you can identify that and then correct for it, you may continue to have these dreams. Or you may not, This is all a bit up in the air. This is a post by a user named Army Boy with 3 eyes. The post is titled, "Girlfriend's Dreams." The post reads, "So my girlfriend has been having some weird and very vivid nightmares for the past day, and I thought I'd share them with you. Just 20 minutes ago, I hear her say, 'Baby, I found him,' and I turn around with her pointing at the mirror on the end of the bed and saying, 'He is the man. He is the man. He went through the hole in the spider web again and again.' I started telling her it's a dream, and she got upset, still sleeping, eyes shut. And then silence again. And a few days ago, she started touching the wall next to me, exactly where some light, and hitting it, saying there was a fire to put out." Wow. So, first thought here is that these aren't nightmares. Your girlfriend is a sleepwalker. Or at the very, the dreams don't really even sound particularly scary. I'm curious to know if she can recall them when she wakes up, because it could be either night terrors or sleepwalking. And the reason I know that is because she's moving around and acting them out. Nightmares happen during REM sleep or light sleep in the case of nightmare disorder. But for deep sleep, this is the sleep cycle in which you'll have night terrors and sleepwalking. And the reason that we know that is that in REM sleep, you have atonia, which means your brain paralyzes your body, so you actually can't move in REM sleep. So the fact that she's moving around means these are either night terrors or sleepwalking. I would also confirm with her if she can remember the dreams after the fact, because usually in deep sleep nightmares and dreams, you can't remember it. I'd be curious to know. I mean, it sounds dangerous, right? Sleepwalking can be dangerous. Because you can actually like act out things that later end up messing you up, right? But I would check in, just make sure that she doesn't do anything too crazy. Now, in terms of trying to analyze the nightmares, it's difficult because you aren't the one having it and you aren't the one reporting on it. But actually, the reason I wanted to read this one is because of the presence of the spider web. And spiders, I don't think I've ever actually interpreted a nightmare based on spiders, but if there's a focus on a spider's web in a nightmare, it means that you feel that you are being manipulative to someone, or someone is trying to manipulate you. And what's interesting is that she's pointing to the mirror when she's saying that, but she's describing a man moving through it, which is actually really interesting. Maybe she's talking about you. According to the dream chart, again, I'm speculating, and it's kind of a freaky thought, but maybe in her nightmare you're seeing that in some regard she feels that you are being manipulative, or she's manipulating you, something like that. The fact that she's pointing to the mirror at the foot of the bed, referring to a man, so it's not about herself. And then that's, again though, like the fact that it's a spider's web may not mean what it means on the dream chart. Just because, I wrote that down and it's based on some forum I read somewhere, right? But an interesting thought there. Very neat possibility. Whoops. Sorry. This is a post by a user named its_vogish_zoo. The post is titled, "A Weird Creature/Entity That My Classmate Knows About." The post reads, "So I was in school, and my school just got a different building that was for dorms. Me and my friend just finished packing and unpacking our stuff, so we decided to play on the playground until our next classes start. We go to our next classes, and it's about the same game show type of game. We go out to the playground again and play until about 6 p.m., and we decide to go to our dorm rooms. The next day, I meet up with my friend, and she tells me that one of our classmates told her about some weird creature or entity, the dancing mystery. We decided not to think about it too much. An hour passes and suddenly it got dark, and there was no one else in the park except the classmate who told my friend about the entity. I'm going to call my classmate CM. CM says that we should go to our dorms to see if anyone else is there. We agree to go and check, and if anything scary happens, we will leave. We enter the building, and we see some coal and a small fire. I decide that I'm leaving, and I walk out. CM says that we should go to the school for the same reason. We agree and go. We walk near the school, and our vision gets a bit glitchy, but we still proceed. We are in the building, and it's almost pitch black, but we see some stuff, and suddenly, out of nowhere, my friend gets dragged and exploded to death by a weird laser thing. Now it's just me and CM. My vision is still a bit glitchy, but it starts to get a lot more glitchy, and I hear a creepy voice mumble something. But then, I wake up. The end." So it seems like at the end of the dream you didn't actually end up seeing the dancing mystery, which I was sort of looking forward to seeing. I don't know what it means when your vision gets glitchy in a dream. That's a good thing actually to make a note of. to write down. I think I might have actually already written that down somewhere else. But the only other thing that I could imagine that this dream is about is just a fear of the unknown, seeing as a new building was created. Especially if it's a dorm, so you're spending an extended amount of time in there. Could just be general, like, anxiety, related to the unknown, and the dark, I guess. Don't know what the laser could be. Don't know what the significance of the different friends is, and I know that I won't find anything more by checking on the dream chart. But thank you for posting that. This is a post by the Honey Badger 1223. The post is titled, "My mind is torturing itself every night." The post reads, "So for the past few nights, I say that, but it's been about a month of seeing the same thing, on and off. It starts off as a helicopter crash. I saw a helicopter crash in real life as a child, so maybe that's part of it. It bothers me more now than it did when I first saw it. After it crashes, a guy I used to go to school with appears. We'll call him X. And he starts violently and graphically starts stabbing people up. X was a bully, but as far as I know, he hasn't actually killed anyone. Then X comes for me. Suddenly, I'm no longer on the field near my house. I'm on the roof of an unknown, colorful building with X coming at me with his blades. Then I fall and wake up. It's always the same helicopter crash, the same guy stabbing people up, the same desperate shrieks for help, and the same buildings I fall from. It's always the same, down to the life fading from people's eyes as X stabs them." It's definitely really freaky, and I'm sorry that you're tormented in that manner. It sounds like you have it analyzed pretty well on your own. Like you've identified that it's probably the trauma of being bullied by this fellow, the trauma of seeing or witnessing a helicopter crash. But there's one part that is on the dream chart that I could analyze, which is falling. So falling indicates that you feel unable to control yourself or some aspect of your personal life, or if you're okay, that's not part of it. The second part. So you feel out of control in some aspect of your life. I'm also curious to know what this colorful building might represent. That's not something that you really delved into too much, but that's the roof off of which you fall. So whatever your, like, this is the only part of the dream that I think you don't have a solid grasp on, which is why I'm kind of tackling it specifically, right? Because whatever this colorful building represents, that could be a clue as to what the, what was it? Yeah, the feeling of, the colorful building could be a clue as to the aspect of your personal life that you feel unable to control. So you would have to figure out what that colorful building represents. When dreaming of being unable to see clearly, the dream may indicate that there is a situation that is overwhelming, something that is so overpowering that you can't focus on it. Interesting. May also be a dream advising you that you're too close to a problem and you need to step back to see it more clearly. Interesting. Yeah. I really didn't... I can't see how that would fit into... So this is, of course, referring to the previous dream about the fellow who is in a dorm, and there's a monster, but they never actually end up seeing it. The dancing mystery, I think it was called. But I feel like those interpretations might not necessarily apply here in terms of the dream being, too close to the problem. It just sounds like the dream, I don't get the sense that there's that much depth behind it, but I could be wrong. This is a post by a user named Avacel. The post is titled, Recurring Nightmares About Tidal Waves and Tsunamis. The post reads, Hi everyone, first time poster. I thought I would write down a recent dream I had. I think it's a pretty common one. Ever since I was a child, I've had nightmares about huge waves and accidents on beaches, like being stuck in rocks. Usually, it's just one wave and I wake up. Last night, the waves kept coming, even when I boarded a plane to escape them. Every place I ended up on was a beach. We climbed through sand dunes, but my legs were so heavy I couldn't get away from the water. Next, I was in a resort, and the wave came straight up over the pool, bringing with it debris and power lines. I could feel the branches of trees cutting my legs open. Then, I dreamt that a gigantic ocean liner had run aground and crushed my sister and I. I died, but was a ghost talking to people who could see me. No one wanted to do anything about my death. It felt lonely. These dreams went the whole night. It is so exhausting having these dreams. I never feel well rested, and I'm afraid to sleep. So, a dream in which you drown. It's about in the middle of the chart here. A drowning nightmare can indicate that you're overwhelmed with emotion, or you're repressing desires or thoughts. And tidal waves are another variation of the same thing. So, what I would, guess from this is that you're maybe a more emotional person. And then death, there are big changes in your life and you're not in control. So I would guess that, because death was another part of your nightmare, obviously. So I would guess that whatever the changes in your life are, or whatever it is that you feel is making you out of control, is what you're emotional about. So again, kind of a vague interpretation there, as is the nature of the dream chart. But yeah, all that I would really gather from the fact that it's drowning is that you're probably a more emotional person, and you're really feeling the flow of that in your nightmares rather than honing in on any specific thing, any specific problems. That might be it for that interpretation. Yeah, no, it doesn't really seem to fit, unless hitting me with this unless ... meme. Oh, wow, these are shorter ones tonight. I feel like I'm blasting through these. This is a post by a user named Sunon Dengis, or Dengis maybe, or Dengis. Anyway, the post is titled Lil Bites. The post reads, To give some context, a lot of times on my dreams some kind of intuition comes, and I bite my tongue if I don't feel pain. I know I'm dreaming, so when I know I'm safe in that realm... Okay. I just realized I shouldn't read this one. Okay, yeah, that one's probably a little bit inappropriate for YouTube. Okay, sorry, let's get into a different one. This is a post by a user named let_particular. The post is titled Zero Gravity Nightmare. The post reads, It's another nightmare I remember floating up from my room. I don't know what happened to my room, but it got bigger and messed up. I look around in zero gravity and feel a sudden uncomfortable fear. I don't know why. It's just zero gravity, right? Nothing else, right? Please, I don't want this. Then I was pushed by someone behind me. Don't know who. I tried to turn around my neck to see, but I can't. I try to pinch my cheeks, but it feels but it's feel numb. That's what it says. I know some things is wrong, so I float to see what's going on, and then I was pushed again, and suddenly, glitches came out of nowhere. Then I saw something that wasn't human. It wears a suit, a fancy one, and its face looks like the look-see, but no cuts on the skin face, and have deer horns. Sorry, the grammar is a little difficult here. He's looking at me with an unsettling grin with sharp teeth on his face, and pointed his finger to me. Then his teeth disappeared. I tried to think of a way out of this nightmare. I don't want to die like the last time. Nightmare being stabbed. Oh God. Then the most stupid idea occurred to me. Maybe I should just think positively instead of fear. Maybe that's his weakness. I may never know if I don't try. So I just try, and to act like I'm having fun, floating around in this bizarre version of my room. Then a final push from whoever that thing was, and I woke up. Interesting. That's certainly a very unique nightmare. I haven't heard of a zero gravity one. You hear of falling. You're sort of trapped in your own room with a man in a suit. I feel like I'm going to have no chance of interpreting this nightmare. He's wearing a suit and he's grinning at you. He sounds like a sleep paralysis demon. He sounds a bit like the Slender Man, except instead of a no face, he has a very obvious facial expression. It sounds sort of like an alien-esque thing because you're flying through space and maybe the man is an imposter or an alien or something of that nature. Again, it sounds very entertaining, but I have no idea. There's no context here for me to try to interpret this, I'm afraid. But thank you for posting that. Let particular. This is a post by a user named Satans_left_Canthus. The post is titled Drowning My Own Mother. The post reads, "For the last about 2 weeks or so, I've been experiencing this recurring nightmare that has kind of deeply affected me. In this particular dream, I'm walking through a large, cold, open space until I come across a fog-covered lake. In this lake, I see a woman with her back to me, I think that means, beginning to thrash in the water, as if she is about to start drowning. I enter the lake and approach her before I fill with rage and hold the woman's head under the water until I can feel that she has stopped moving and she's drowned. The worst part is that despite never seeing the woman's face, hearing her voice, or seeing any distinguishing features, in my head I am certain that this woman is my mother. So yeah, kinda spooky. I think that's putting it lightly. Satan's left Canthus. That is a really freaky imagery. I really like that nightmare. But if you look up fourth from the bottom on the chart here, being the aggressor indicates that you're feeling guilt or you're afraid about getting caught about something you're hiding. In this case, I think we can definitely say that it's a feeling of guilt. The other thing that's noteworthy is that there's an element in the dream of kicking someone when they're down. They were already about to start drowning, and you went over there and made it happen. So it could be that maybe you feel like you wronged your mother to some extent. Maybe when she was going through a tough time, maybe you didn't make it easy on her. Now, the fact that it's not immediately obvious that it's your mother, that's a bit interesting as well. The fact that you'd never actually see her face. I mean, that could maybe indicate that she doesn't want you to know that whatever you did made things more difficult on her. And deep down you feel guilty, but she's trying not to have you feel guilty, if you know what I mean. She's maybe telling you, oh no, it's fine, what, like you didn't, you forgot to get groceries one day, and she's like, oh no, it's cool, and you're like deep down like that really hurt her, and you feel guilty about that. Obviously, I'm picking a very benign example. Oh, here in my chat, your dream mother represents how you mother yourself, nurture yourself, love yourself, care for yourself. To be drowning is to be unable in your capacity to mother yourself. Just another possibility from the internet. That's another interesting interpretation, that you feel rage toward yourself. But no, I feel like I like my initial interpretation better, to be honest. Yeah, the only other thing that I guess I didn't touch on is just the fact that you're filled with rage before you drown the person. So you obviously regret it later, and it ends up making you feel sad, and it's obviously affecting you kind of deeply, as you mentioned. But maybe at the time you didn't feel, whatever you did at the time, you didn't feel that it was bad. I think that's what I would gather from that. And then in hindsight, you regretted it. But I hope you got something out of that interpretation. I did get one very short viewer submission this week. But before we get into that, I think that let's read one or two more from Reddit. Oh. Sorry. This is a post by a user named DZL239. The post is titled, "Still the creepiest I've had." The post reads, "When I was a kid, I had this dream that I was laying in bed in my pitch black room, and there was a white doll floating around the perimeter of my bed back and forth. I immediately panicked and jumped out of bed and ran down the hall as fast as possible. I tried to jump through my mom's door, and when I made impact, it bounced me back down the hall, and I hit the ground, which made me jump awake. The scariest part was as soon as my eyes opened, I heard that doll giggle in my ear. I laid in bed, frozen and sweaty as hell until the sun came up." Oh, that takes me back. Not the doll, but lying in bed until the sun comes up after having a nightmare when you're a kid. I've definitely had that. I forget what the meaning of a doll in a nightmare is. These are all on my list that I'm like doing another batch of nightmare interpretations soon, but I just haven't got to it yet. Bounced you back. I'll just tell you a little story of my own, relation to this. Like, I had this recurring nightmare when I was a kid. I had it probably about 50 times. I think to this day it's my most recurring nightmare. And it was literally just, I would wake up. It was a false awakening in the middle of the night. And I would look under my desk, which was across the room, and there was a blue fire just kind of burning there. It wasn't out of control. It was just a little bit more than a small flame. And it just burned there, and then it spoke to me in this unknown language that was clearly not any of the human languages. And I knew that if I got up or tried to run past it, or tried to go to the bathroom or anything, that it would kill me. Like, I just had this feeling. And so I think that having that recurring nightmare actually prolonged my bedwetting, because I would wake up for real, and I would look across my room under my desk, and I would be like, what if the fire's still there, but it's just like dim right now? So I mean, yeah, it's not a doll giggling in my ear, but I guess it's a flame speaking to me and not making me want to get out of bed. So I relate to it in that sense. Maybe one more short one. Oh yeah, this one kind of ties in as well. Nightmares from childhood. This is a post by a user named ZNOOGIN. The post is titled, "Nightmares When I Was a Young Kid." The post reads, I had this recurring nightmare for a couple of years. Around a decade on, all I can remember is being in a room of nothingness. No floor, walls, ceiling, no me. I remember a creepy voice calling me, then another voice. I don't know what they said. I don't know why I had these dreams. So that one feels like very similar to mine in terms of just the sort of voice calling to you. Except mine did have an object that it was calling from. And it's similar to the last one I just read about the creepy doll speaking in childhood. I wonder what these fears are as a kid. Just little murmurs in the dark. Maybe it's a fear of the dark itself. That's something that you definitely have as a kid. Like most kids have that, right? Type 1 in the chat if you had a fear of the dark as a kid, and type 2 in the chat if you still have a fear of the dark. So, I did receive one viewer submission this week. It's from someone who actually follows me on TikTok. By the way, I have a TikTok where I talk about various nightmare things. That's linked in the description if you're interested. So this one's kind of a short one, but it is from Jimmy Dean Doherty. I think that's how that's pronounced. And the post has no title, but it reads like this. The nightmare I had last night. I saw a person with a bird mask. Its voice was really deep, and it had a scythe on its back. It had black eyes with blood running down its face, and it started crying. Then I saw the other two things with an animal mask in the room, and I can't remember anything else. Well, I happen to know that this individual has quite a bit of sleep paralysis as well. I can't remember what demons he has. I believe that all of his demons had some sort of animal. Jimmy Dean, I guess if he's watching this, he can correct me, but I think he was the one who told me about the doe sleep paralysis demon, which is, it's a woman who wears the head of a deer over her head, and then she just like points a finger gun at you and says, die, die, die. I think that was his sleep paralysis demon, but maybe, I mean, obviously this person with the bird mask is the plague doctor. It's sort of what was worn by old-timey doctors, and he's carrying a scythe so he could represent death. Black eyes, blood dripping down, that could represent, some sort of hemorrhagic fever or something, so just some sort of terrible disease. But yeah, and then the fact that you've got other animal masks going on in the room, I'd be really curious to know what sort of things happen in life where you really do seem to see animals, and especially maybe taxidermy, in just like a very creepy way. Like maybe you had a grandparent or something who was into taxidermy. Maybe you hunted, when you were too young. You weren't ready for it. Something like that. Like, yeah. I'm not really sure what the significance of the plague doctor would be, though. 1 and 2, thanks. I wasn't really expecting much response, but that's fine. Thank you for responding there in the chat. That's about it for this week. Next week, as I mentioned, not entirely sure what we're going to be talking about. Could be another presentation. If I hear back from any of the people I reached out to someone who has had night terrors from childhood, and I reached out to someone who has sleep paralysis for several years, and they have it in like varying degrees. So I think that they'd be able to give a more nuanced perspective, which is what I'm interested in. So that is about it, though, for this week. Subscribe and hit the bell and hit the like button. All of those things would help me out tremendously, especially if after subscribing you then continue to watch my videos. And yeah, so that's talked about next week. On Thursday, I'll be doing another horror story as usual. This time it's going to be the Yuxa, I believe. I'm not sure what culture that's from, but it's this dragon golden snake thing with venom. I don't think it's meant to be a scary creature, but I'm going to make it into one, as I like to do. But until next time, embrace the beautiful dark.